Hey everyone, this is Brian from the Tennis IQ podcast. Josh and I hope that you are enjoying the content and discussions that we put out week after week. If you'd like to support the podcast and help us to continue to produce quality episodes, please visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/tennisiqpodcast/membership. Currently, we have 3 tiers of support: the fan level at $3 per month, the supporter level at $7 per month, and the champion level at $20 per month. Benefits of joining the Tennis IQ podcast community include episode transcripts, participation in book club discussions, and access to monthly masterclasses with me and Josh. For more on these benefits of support, head on over to our Patreon page at patreon.com/tennisiqpodcast/membership. Thank you so much. And now, on to the show. Hello and welcome to the Tennis IQ podcast. I'm Brian Lomax.
And I'm Josh Berger. And in today's episode, we're going to be discussing acceptance. And I think there's a couple different ways that we can approach this topic. I think one of them is bigger picture acceptance in terms of somebody's acceptance over their overall game, performance, development over a longer period of time. And I see this with players at times, a disappointment, a frustration, a lack of acceptance over someone's game, over someone's level, over where someone is at that particular moment. So I think we can look at this in terms of a bigger picture, but also in more in terms of within a match. There, as we've talked about so many times in this podcast, there will be matches where you are playing at your best. There'll be matches where you're playing all right, and there will be matches where you're playing less than your best. Whatever we want to call that. And I find that one of the biggest things that holds people back in some of these matches where they're not playing at their best is a lack of acceptance, over their level, over a lack of acceptance over the fact that they will have these days. And what can happen in these moments? Players can start to look for excuses. Players can start to tank. Players might start to cheat. Players will, rather than getting to the point where, all right, I acknowledge this is where my game is at on this particular day, a number of players will look for some sort of excuse or try to change up the dynamic in some way that's not necessarily positive. So I think we want to be able to look at this topic, both bigger picture in terms of, being accepting over where our game is, in terms of our development, but also on a particular day, because I think in both of these situations, by being more accepting, by understanding that this is reality, we can't change that, then we're able to really respond in a way that's positive rather than feeling like we're just reacting to our feelings around the situation or maybe our denial of the situation itself.
I think your intro there prompted some thoughts on my part, Josh. Like you said, there can be sort of an in-match concept of acceptance, and then you also refer to maybe where a player might think he or she is in their career, and so there's a higher level piece. And when you brought that up, it made me think of Eric Buderak's TEDx talk about, even though the title of it's sounds a bit off, right? It says, don't dream big. It's really more about dreaming small and so forth. And he has a story in there about when he won his first ATP point, and he was talking to some of his fellow, his peers at the moment. And Eric himself, I think, was very, very happy with where he was, right? He won his first ATP point, and his process of simply setting daily goals and trying to just achieve those things each day and enjoying the struggle of improving and working on his game. But he contrasted that with some of the others that he was talking to who were not happy with where they were. They had expectations of being at a higher level. And they weren't able to do what you're talking about, Josh, which is sort of accepting where they are. right? They're a little bit more worried about where they're not, and that's difficult. And I suppose that could also be looked at within a match. And so, I guess first of all, I would recommend people to watch that Eric Budarak TEDx talk. It's only about 13 minutes, not a really long time, but I show it to every single player I work with uh, on a number of levels. This being one of them, but I think it's very inspiring the way he made his career happen, etc. So I'd highly recommend that, and especially related to this topic of how do we end up in a place where we're not upset about where we're not, because that's a really important thing is acceptance, and as you use the right word, Josh, I think of reality, because whenever we think about um, reality tends to win the battle because it's not going to change. That's what it is. And in order for us to move forward, what has to change is us and some perspectives about whatever is happening in our career or in a match. The situation itself is unlikely to change. You can't avoid it. You have to go through it. So what really needs to change is you.
Absolutely, and I think I think there's great power in coming to terms with that. I think it can be very scary or intimidating to be accepting of different situations that we're in, whether bigger picture, smaller picture, whether this is something more long term or short term. I think I think one of the reasons why people are in denial, or one of the reasons why people maybe it's not so easy for people to be accepting, is that it's scary. It's scary to, it can be a hit to our ego. It can be, it can change how sort of we see ourselves or our identity. However, once we're able to do that, it becomes so much easier because then we can take action. Once we're able to be accepting, then we can take action about the situation. Um, and when we're denying that that's the case, or trying to push something away, or pretend it's not there, or ignoring it, then we can't take any action on it. We're just kind of acting on the situation. Once we can take action and make a change, then things can start to change, and hopefully in a positive way. And I think it's the same type of thing where, if we have a negative thought that pops up, right? We're about to play in a match and we have a thought, right? We have a thought that, all right, this is not going to go well. I'm not going to play well today. I lost to this person last time. I'm probably going to lose to them again. Or, oh, this person is a counterpuncher or a pusher or a moonballer. I don't like playing against these types of players. So today's not going to be my day, right? And you have that thought. There's different ways to respond to that. We can ignore it, pretend that that thought's not there. We can fight against that thought, um, or we can accept it. And some people might think, well, why would we accept a thought like that? What's the benefit of that? And the point is, we can accept it for what it is. It's a thought. Our, and we could also try to think about where that's coming from. But a thought is just a thought. It's, our brain is making a prediction that it's not going to go well today. And there's, evolutionarily, we're trying to protect ourselves. We're trying to protect ourselves from negative from further negative things happening, right? If we expect that things are going to go great and then we lose, maybe it's harder for us to handle that than if we had expected that it's not going to go well out there and then it doesn't. Okay, then hey, I was already ready for that. In certain ways, I've already cushioned the blow for myself. So, understanding and accepting that thought comes from a good place in terms of, hey, I'm trying to protect myself. However, understanding that thought is just me making a prediction, me guessing, me, in a pessimistic way, me thinking about how today might go, but that's not actually reality, right? I have no idea how the match is going to go. My opponent could withdraw from the match 2 minutes before the match starts, right? I could win, I could lose. We could play in a really close battle. It could be lopsided. Who knows, right? I don't know. And I think recognizing that and accepting that is really important. So I think in this example, we can accept the thought that we have itself without deciding to give it such power and deciding to interpret it in a way that means that, all right, we're doomed. It's not going to go well out there. I had this thought, and therefore it's not going to be my day. Instead, can we be more accepting of the thought itself and see it for what it is, even understand where it's coming from, but then really trying to commit to what do we want to do out there? How do we want to play? How do we want to compete? How do we want to fight? So I think that's an example. I think, another example would be, all right, the match doesn't start off so well. I'm down 2-0, I'm down 3-0, whatever it is. And my level is not where I want it to be. Okay. Do I want to look for an excuse there? Is it my racket? Is it my strings? Maybe. Or can I really commit to the type of tennis that I want to play, the type of competitor I want to be, the type of attitude that I want to have? And, when we talk about having a great attitude, it's not just having a great attitude when things are going well. It's a lot easier to have a great attitude in those situations. Can we really commit to having a great attitude, really commit to moving our feet, commit to watching the ball, commit to doing the types of things that can help us turn around a match like that? But it all starts with that point of acceptance.
And you go back to like what you were saying before, the accepting the thought. Um, you're not required to listen to it. The thought, as you said, Josh, is just a thought. It's actually not like an absolute truth. You can certainly treat it as if it were, though, and then that is that the pessimistic viewpoint. And then if you do take that approach, then after the match, you can just say, yeah, well, I knew this was going to happen and I was right. So very easy to be right when you're pessimistic because you're predicting that you won't do well. And in a sport like tennis, it's very easy to create a negative result. But it takes a lot of courage to just accept that thought for what it is. And as you said, Josh, it's simply a protective feature. It's not coming from a bad place. And what's it protecting? It's protecting your ego. It's protecting your image as a good player. All of that is potentially under threat every time you go out on the court. But that is actually the challenge of tennis, is to understand that the result is uncertain. And it teaches us that pessimism doesn't work. It teaches us that we have to have the courage to be optimistic throughout the match. And we have to constantly be looking at the situation we're actually in and accept it for what it is, rather than letting other unpleasant emotions or thoughts drive our future actions. I had a player that I was talking to last week, Josh, and I think this kind of gets to what we're trying to discuss here with acceptance. So he was playing a player who's about 1.2 points higher on UTR. So he loses the first set, like 6-2, 6-3, and then comes back and plays a brilliant second set. It's up 6-2, like wins the set 6-2. So he's with this guy 1.2. I mean, that's a fairly significant gap between players, right? So now he's going into the third set. He's up 4-0.
And then 10-point tiebreaker or full
No,
third
this is a
set?
full third set.
Okay.
Up 4-0 in a full third set. And, something happens, right? Starts maybe to think about winning and so forth. And then it's 4-4. And he tells me how angry he is at 4-4 and, ends up losing the set 6-4. So he lost 6 games in a row there in the third set to lose the match. And I obviously had a lot of compassion and empathy for what he had gone through there. And I said, what if I told you before the match that you would be at 4-all in the third set with this player? Would you take that? I said, yeah. And then he sort of looks at me and says, wow, that's an interesting perspective. I was like, yeah, it's like, I know it's hard to accept this, but at 4-all, does it really matter how you got there? on one hand, you can say it does, and if you feel like it does, well, that's gonna affect how you perform next. But if you can somehow just accept, okay, it's at 4-all. I'm still 2 games away. I can still do this. I can, as you use the right word, Josh, commit. Let me commit to taking some positive action here. Let me commit to some values or character skills that are important to me in this moment. Still have everything to play for. And so we're not actually pretending that this is easy, but if in that moment, if you're that player who has lost a 4-love lead and now it's 4-all, can you somehow accept that you're at 4-all, try to let go of the emotions of the journey to 4-all, and focus on what you need to do next? Then you give yourself a better chance. This player didn't have that perspective in that moment and was unable to turn it around. But sometimes this is why it's good to talk through these things, even with a coach or a sports psych professional, to give you those better ideas behind your thinking. Because I think that for me, Josh, you mentioned the brain predicting things, right? We know that the brain is a prediction machine, prediction modeler. To me, it's really important that we expose ourselves to different ways of thinking, new perspectives on a lot of these situations, so that our prediction models become better and better. And I think that that's an important part of the work that we do. I think when we strictly just look at, well, that's just a thought, accept it, commit to something, and move on, that doesn't address the fact that we're not sort of upgrading how we think and how we predict situations. So that in those, when that happens, maybe the next time this player gets to 4-4 and has lost a 4-0 lead, perhaps he would be able to change because he's had a new perspective on some of these things. So I think while acceptance is a huge, huge part of this, I think the other part of the work is, can you learn to upgrade how you think so you have better thoughts in these difficult moments that allow you to accept more and more?
Definitely, definitely. And I think it's important that when we're thinking about when do we do this thinking on the court, um, one of the times where it happens most is in between points. And we recently had a master class, our first master class, which was all about the in between points routine, which I'd encourage people to check out both on our Patreon page and on our YouTube channel. And really, and we've talked about the in between point routine in the past, and I think really what's important when in between points is that we have the chance to accept what has happened, accept the last point, accept the score. There's nothing we can do about it. It's in the past. And what do we have to do? Once we can accept that, then we can start to reset and start to focus on the next point, which is the only point we have any sort of control over. And we've talked about this concept of WIN, or what's important now. And recognizing that never is what's important now is never the last point, or what's never what's happened in the past. It always is what's immediately coming up, because that's the only thing that we can actually impact. That is the most important point of a match, the next point. So I think once we can get to that point of accepting what has happened, then it becomes so much easier to be fully present and fully engaged in the next point, because we recognize that this is something out of our control, that this last point, our level up to this point in the match, everything that's happened in recent years in terms of our game and maybe our results. There's nothing we can do about any of that. So can we be fully present and fully ready to go for this next point, for this next match that's coming up, for this next day of practice? Because that's the only thing we can actually impact. That is what's most important. And but it's only possible to do that once we're able to be accepting of how we've gotten to this point, of what's happened, and also recognizing certain realities, certain truths. The fact that people have days where they play better and days where they play worse, and this is true of everybody. This is true of junior players. This is true of adult USTA League players. This is true of top WTA and ATP players. They all have days where they're not at their best. Top 5 players in the world lose to players ranked lower than them regularly. Not most of the time, obviously, because of their rankings, but this happens regularly. Top WTA and ATP players miss overheads, miss easy volleys, double faults. This happens. And it happens to players, that aren't at that level, obviously, more often. But I find that when players aren't able to accept that these things will happen, that these things are possible, that these things happen to the best players in the world too, and we think it's just us that miss that easy overhead or that easy put away volley when our opponent is off the court, then it's a lot tougher to process. It's a lot tougher to handle or to accept. But once we can accept some of the realities of the sport, and it's so much easier to handle. And another reality might be the fact that, tennis is not a sport where you can just run out the clock, right? If we think about other sports, basketball or soccer, being a couple of examples, American football being another example, you can have ways to run out the clock, right? There is a specific clock, and if you can, maintain possession or whatever the situation, you can run out the clock. In tennis, it's not like that. You have to continue winning points to finish off an opponent. So because somebody's up 4-0, or because somebody has match point or multiple match points, we've seen that in pro tennis recently, it doesn't guarantee anything. You still have to continue winning points to win the match. So I think being able to accept that reality, and maybe that's a cruel reality or a tough reality to handle or to accept, I think it becomes a lot easier once we understand that. Then it becomes a lot easier to accept it and to respond in a way that helps us be effective ultimately.
For sure, the finishing of matches is difficult. I remember our conversation with the journalist and author Howard Bryant, and he talked about how he felt like that was one of the things that makes tennis unique, the idea of finishing. And even if you look at other fighting sports, they all have time associated with it. Maybe there are rounds, a certain number of minutes, but there's no sort of finish there to the end, and like to a knockout or to a pin or something like that, to some submission. Where in tennis, yeah, you have to finish that off. I think there's also, Josh, another angle here, which is sort of outside of the player. Coaches and parents may also have some difficulty accepting things, and you've probably had lots of those conversations as well. And I think the story I'm going to tell is more from other sports, but it definitely applies to tennis coaches and certainly applies to tennis parents. But there have been, I know I said to you earlier too, I know there are 3 teams I worked with at this one school in which their coaches, and these were not the tennis coaches, all complained for different reasons that their teams couldn't do something. They either couldn't do a drill, they couldn't run a system, something like that. And so they would complain about their team that they can't do this. And my question to them was, well, how do you know that they should be able to do it? Like, why do you think they should be able to do that? And it really got down to, for them, this idea of, you have to coach the team you have, not the team you wish you had. And in all 3 of those situations, that's what was going on with those coaches. And they were unable, at first at least, to change what they were trying to do. And when they did, though, when they decided to take a particular drill and break it down into its more constituent parts, it got better, right? They built it up from being such a complex thing at its, first glance for the team, to something, all right, well, let's just work on this aspect of it. and see if we can get good at that. And then when they put it all together, it got better. But really, the progress of the team wasn't the team's fault in that regard. It was the coach's inability to deal with the reality and accept who they had. They didn't have the team they wanted. They were really almost like coaching for a team they might have in 5 years. Well, that's not the team you have. And I think you can see the same thing with tennis coaches and certainly tennis parents. We get lots of discussions and conversations with parents and coaches about why a particular player isn't further along. And there may be some legitimate reasons to that, but we all have to deal with where the player is right now and try to understand what he or she needs in this moment. Maybe there's something around the motivational climate of the player. Is it too expectations laden? Is it too result oriented, or even expectations of playing well as if that's a controllable feature of one's tennis game? I think that's one of the bigger ones that I hear. Well, so and so's not playing well. Okay, I wish that were so easy to do in a sport like tennis. And I know we've talked about this, Josh, a lot of times. The emphasis of coaches and parents can't be on expecting playing well and certainly not expecting wins. It's got to be down to very small, controllable behaviors with an emphasis on learning, improvement, and enjoyment. And let that build out. And teach players, as you're suggesting here, to accept whatever is going on in their lives and learn to deal with what that is. This idea of expectations really often gets in the way. This idea of wishing things were different gets in the way. And generally, as in like until I convince those coaches, prevents any productive action from occurring. Because you're not really willing to see what's happening. You're not really willing to see what the problem is, just as your player isn't either. So this applies to, I think, the entire, climate around the player. Yeah, a player might be struggling to accept things, but how about the parents? How about the coaches? Or if you're an adult player, you also are dealing with coaches, dealing with yourself, dealing with teammates. The more that we learn to accept things for what they are, and not have this sort of fantastical, wishful thinking going on, the more we're going to be able to take productive action and commit to that.
Absolutely, absolutely. Can we get to that point where this is the situation? This is the way that things are. So we need to handle that. And I think part of being a great tennis player is being a problem solver. And I think that is actually one thing that is not necessarily instructed quite as much from coaches as from coaches and from parents as it could be. I think oftentimes junior players as they're growing up and adult players to some extent too have this idea that, okay, I need to play well. I need to have an amazing forehand, amazing backhand, amazing serve, volley, return, and that I'm going to play well. But tennis is not a sport where someone feeds us a ball and where we're keeping track of our points based on how many forehands we make or how many backhands we make. There's an opponent on the other side of the net who is hopefully is trying to make things difficult for you. So part of it is, can you be a problem solver and handle the different situations of who you're playing against? You will play, if you play long enough in the sport, you will play all different types of people, all different types of personalities, all different types of playing styles, all different types of sportsmanship levels, all different types of people. That's reality, right? We talk about accepting reality. You will play somebody who makes line calls that you disagree with. Guaranteed. If you play long enough in the sport, guaranteed that will happen. You will play somebody that moonballs. That will happen. You will play someone that comes to net all the time. You will play someone that maybe grunts really loudly or says, come on, after every point that they win. These things will happen. And I think there's different ways that we can view it. We can say, okay, I hate playing against this type of player, this type of person. I hope I don't have to play them again. Um, we can wish things were different, or we can get to that point of acceptance and understand these these types of play people are out there. We will play all of them as we continue to play. But how can we maybe frame this in a different way where that would be more beneficial? Can we frame each of these situations as a situation that can help get us better? Okay, we're playing this person who is known for maybe pushing or maybe just moonballing or maybe just getting, playing defense and getting shots back, which is a playing style that often is heavily criticized, which I don't think is fair, but it's often heavily criticized. So how do we want to view the situation? Are we viewing this situation as I have to play this person again? Here we go again. Or are we saying, all right, I haven't done my best against these types of players in the past. This time I'm going to approach this differently. I'm going to accept that they're a tough player to play against, and therefore I'm going to treat them with more respect. I'm going to treat them as a tough, challenging opponent, and I'm going to really try to engage with what I have to do against this player, and I'm going to really try to commit to that. And I think by thinking that way, by viewing it as a challenge of, hey, this is a chance, this is an opportunity for me to become a better player, for me to become a more effective player against these types of players. Hey, I'm playing this player who maybe has cheated in the past, or I think has cheated or made line calls that I disagree with. Okay, I can. This is a great chance for me to practice being in control of my emotions. Can I be in control of my emotions in a tough environment to do that? We'll see. This is going to be a challenge. This is an opportunity for me to improve at this. But we need to get to that point where we can accept that this is who we're playing, that this is the situation, and then we can come up with a game plan for how we want to handle it, and then try to commit towards that. But if we can't get to that point of acceptance, we can't even get that process started.
And I think you can take it one step further, Josh. It's not only becoming a better player, but you're becoming a stronger person. Much of
Yep.
what we're facing on the tennis court is really training you for the adversities that you're going to handle in the rest of your life, whether that pressure, regulating your emotions, dealing with difficult people. That's certainly going to happen outside of the tennis court. Can you learn to translate some of the challenges that you're overcoming on the tennis court into lessons for how to handle the rest of your life? And that's actually been a way of looking at things that has resonated pretty well with a lot of the younger players I work with. Sort of get it that, oh yeah, this is actually making me a stronger player, stronger person for life. And a lot of the concepts you're talking about are really important in becoming a strong, functionally, adept human being, and knowing how to deal with these things outside of the tennis court. So tennis is almost like your character building gym, and it's making you a stronger person. And perhaps that's a point of view that resonates with you. That okay, that's why I'm going through a lot of these things, and this is making me stronger, not only as a tennis player but as a human being. And acceptance, it's a difficult concept, but it's going to help me. It's going to help me be stronger in all aspects of my life, and let me try to embrace that. Let me try to practice this. Let's see if I can get good at it. Because I think after listening to us discuss this topic, hopefully that inspires someone to try this, to try to be better, to perhaps recognize that in their own game they're having some of that wishing things were different sort of attitude, or an inability to let go of expectations or let go of the pessimistic storytelling that's happening in their mind. Um, and it's as easy as simply trying to do it. Maybe working with a coach or a parent or a sports psych person on that. But it doesn't cost anything to try to do this. And there's tons of things that one can read on the concept of acceptance and how to deal with reality a little bit better, how to commit to positive actions that are more in line with what you would like to hopefully achieve, or at least give you a better chance of achieving that. So I think it's been a great discussion, Josh, on a very important topic. It ties, I think, to a lot of other things that we've discussed recently, like with suffering and consistency, etc. But hopefully, people have gotten a lot out of this one.
Absolutely. I think it is an important topic. I think it does definitely connect to other concepts that we've talked about recently. And I think it's something that we've touched on, but I think it's definitely the type of concept that warrants its own discussion, its own episode. I think maybe one final point that I would add is can we start to see acceptance as a skill? Can this be a skill that we are trying to develop in our own game? All right, I'm able in our own game and in our own life. Okay, I'm trying to be more accepting of the way that things are. Okay, this is how things are today. This is how things are in general in terms of where my game is right now. And I can wish that things are different. I can wish that maybe I did things differently in the past, or that things were set up differently in terms of the match. But that's not reality. Can I be more accepting of that? And can I view this as a skill and understand that by working on this skill, I get a little bit closer to that type of player that I'm striving to become. That player that I'm not at this moment, but that player that I'm striving to become. And accepting where we are, accepting where we're heading, but yeah, accepting that there is a difference there in terms of where we are to that player that we're striving towards towards becoming. So I think once we can view it as a skill, then we can view it as something that we can work on, and it's something that we can try to get better and better at. And I know we've talked a lot about this concept of controlling the controllables. And it is something that I talk to people about generally the first time when I talk with them as a starting point. And really, one of the key ideas there is acceptance. Can we be accepting of things that are out of our control? They can be annoying, they can be frustrating, we can wish that they were different, but ultimately there's literally nothing that we can do about them. So once we get to that point where we buy into that, where we accept that, then we can determine what are the types of things that I can actually do something about. What are those things within my control, my effort, my attitude, my strategy, my intensity, all, a number, my self-talk, my routines, a number of different things. But that all starts with acceptance. That all starts with accepting reality. And okay, I can't control these things. Can't control the past. I can't control the score, what the score is currently, but I need to accept that, and then we can move on in a positive way.
And when you fight reality, reality always wins. So
Yep.
it's just a good thing to try to embrace and accept that as a perspective, right? So great episode, Josh, and I appreciate the conversation. Thank you all for listening. For more on today's episode, please check out the show notes. If you have any feedback or questions for us, please email us at tennisiqpodcast@gmail.com. Also, if you have a moment, please rate and review the podcast so others can find it. Additionally, please subscribe to the show on your podcast platform of choice, including YouTube, so you can be notified of new episodes. You can also check us out on Instagram. If you would like to support the podcast, please visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/tennisiqpodcast/membership, where you can learn about the benefits of being part of the Tennis IQ podcast community. Thanks again, and we'll talk to you soon in our next episode.